Today, I am sharing 25 quick tips to help save you time, money, and get you a beautiful finish on your furniture and your DIY projects. Some of these quick tips include how to sand furniture by hand, how to fill hardware holes with Bondo, how to paint laminate without sanding, the best drillable wood filler, how to easily cut screws to size, why I prime before filling, and what I do if my furniture doesn't sell, and more. So, let's get started. I took out my all-purpose Bondo putty. I prefer to use all-purpose rather than the wood fill Bondo. I find that it works exactly the same. However, it is a little less expensive than the wood Bondo putty. And I find there is no difference in, once you mix it up in the repairs, it makes no difference at all. So I just take a golf ball size of Bondo and then I add in the hardener. Once a little hardener is added, probably about a pea-sized amount of hardener, I just mix it up really well. In this case, the hardener is blue, so I just want to make sure that the Bondo all gets tinted with the blue hue. And once it's ready to go, I started filling in the holes that the old mirror was attached to. And then I moved on to the drawers and started filling in all the hardware holes there and just working around the dresser, filling in the scratches, etc. With the Bondo, I only mix a small amount at a time because Bondo dries super fast and super hard, which is fabulous. I mean, this is the reason why I love working with it. But you don't want to mix up a large batch because it will go hard on you before you actually fill in all the hardware holes. So I just mix it up in smaller batches. It's super easy and fast to do. This ensures that the Bondo stays nice and creamy and easy to work with. A little quick tip when I'm filling hardware holes or any sort of holes with the Bondo, I don't worry about an excess going beneath the dresser. In this case, it was the mirror holes and it kind of squeezed out in the hole underneath. I just go in and I use my putty knife and I just scrape it right off. Try and invest in the best paintbrush that you possibly can. Paintbrushes are, I mean, they will last you for such a long time if you get a good quality paintbrush. And I have a whole blog post on salvaged inspirations of my favorite paintbrushes, which I'll actually include in the description box below because it's very important. I use my paintbrushes in a variety of ways. I mean, I use the tips to get into the corners, as you can see here. I pounce the paintbrush up and down to get into the grooves. I use the sides of the paintbrush to do the lip on drawers. And really, you just want to get a really good quality paintbrush so it's not going to split on you, so it's not going to lose bristles. So just invest in something that you can afford at the best that you can afford at any given time. And it will last you for years. If you take care of your paintbrushes nicely, they will last you for years. How to burnish your transfers. Now, when you apply the transfers, you might see a little bit of a halo around your design, and that's just part of the adhesive that makes them stick so very well to furniture. And all you have to do to get rid of this little halo is burnish the transfers on, and really that's just give another burnish is a fancy word for just giving them a really good rub to smooth them down. So I just use an old t-shirt. Any sort of soft cloth will work. You can even use your finger. If you just want to use your finger and give the edges of that transfer a good rub. The screws that they had sent with it did not fit. They were too short for these drawers, I guess because the drawers were a little thicker. So then I took these what are they called? Breakaway screws and my Klein tool. And what you do is this Klein tool is fabulous, actually. I can't tell you how much use I've gotten out of it over the years. So what you do is you take your breakaway screw, or it doesn't even have to be a breakaway screw. You can just put a longer screw in there that fits your hardware. Obviously, it's way too long at this point. So you screw it into this Klein tool, and you have different sizes of holes depending on what screw you're using. You screw it in, and then you snap it off at the exact length that is required to fit your hardware into whatever furniture you're putting it on. So I have to say again, this Klein tool has saved the day numerous times for me, and I just love it. Now for the fun part. Working in sections and using my 2-inch mini brush, I brushed on this glaze paint mixture onto one side of the box. I brushed it on a good coat. It was fairly heavy, but I'll come back to that in a bit. This isn't the most ideal way to do it, what I did learn afterwards. But as you can see, I'm brushing on a good amount of paint glaze mixture onto the box. Then taking my wood graining tool, I slid it across and kind of rocked it as I went across. So I keep it straight and then I sort of rock my hand. And here you can see how it creates this really interesting wood grain. I went ahead and repeated this process on all sides of the box, including the top part with the handle. Now, a big shout out to Kay, who is a reader on the SI blog. She left me some fabulous tips to use this wood graining tool because I've seen some other furniture artists use it and their grain turns out so realistic and beautiful. So a few little tips that she explained was practice, because it's a little challenging to get the hang of using it to get a really good pattern. And also, the less paint you use, the better. And then clean off the tool right away. So I think next time I try this wood graining tool on one of my projects, I'm going to take her advice and do that. And hopefully it'll make a bit of a difference. So it'll get a more realistic looking wood grain for me. However, this wasn't the perfect wood looking grain, but it's just fine because I was going to cover it up with a transfer as I mentioned before. So I was pretty happy with this. I used my heat gun to dry off all the sides, and then I just left it to dry the full night and came back the next morning. So to repair all these scratches, I used Bondo, and I found a board that fit on the bottom of the dresser, which created a frame, say, because I wanted the Bondo to be able to sit against something and to get a totally smooth edge at the end. So I took my furniture clamp, clamped the board onto the dresser, and started mixing up my Bondo. Once all my Bondo was totally mixed in together, I started filling in all these scratches with a fair amount. As you can see, it's kind of like icing a cake. I just kept on applying it and then smoothing it out and then applying more and smoothing it out. It doesn't really matter that it's getting on the board because I would take away the board before the Bondo dries 100%. That's a little tip here. When you're filling in any sort of missing area from a piece of furniture, you create, like I said, a frame using any sort of board, cardboard, paint stick, etc. And then when the Bondo is partially dry, you can pull it away so it doesn't stick on, which I'll show you in a moment. I also wanted to mention that large repairs like this, you do want to overfill and you want to apply more Bondo, feather it out from the repair. So you'll notice that I'm applying it much farther higher, or I should say much higher than these dog scratches or bites are. And that's just because you're going to smooth it all down to create a smooth surface, but you want an excess. It's not going to look perfect the first coat. As you can see here, it looks pretty rough actually, but don't worry, once that smooths down and you end up applying a second coat on, it's going to be picture perfect. This faux technique is a lot of fun. I took sea spray texture additive along with chocolate paint, dried sage, and gravel road. I wanted to try 3 different colors on these since I was being experimental. I started with a little cupful or spoonful because there's a spoon included in the texture additive. So I started with a full spoonful and I mixed it in with the chocolate paint. As you can see here, it gets very thick and very, very textured. So I just blended in the chocolate. I actually added in a little bit of extra chocolate paint to smooth it out. And then I did the same with the dried sage. And you can just eyeball it and add as much or as little of the texture powder as you would like. For the gravel road, I ended up putting back a little bit of the texture because that was the color that I had the least texture going in. But it's nice just to play around and test the looks that you really like. This is just a fun little project. I was thinking if it doesn't turn out, it's no biggie. If it does, that's great. So I would just play around, have fun, and see what type of texture additive you like the looks of. Once I had the sea spray mixed in with the 3 different colors, I started painting the dolls. I just took an inexpensive chip brush and I painted it on. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. You can dab it on so you have more texture in some areas than the others. You can brush it on in some areas. Again, there's no right or wrong way. Just have fun and get that color and texture onto the doll head. The dried sage ended up being the thickest of the 3 paints that I did, and it was very thick, but actually it turned out really well because I used it on the largest doll head, which had the eyes that would open and close. And once the texture went into the eye sockets, it just kept the eyes totally closed and it looked fabulous. So I didn't have to worry about them at all. Here's what the 3 head planters looked like right after they were painted. And now it was time to leave them dry. Because there is a lot of texture on here, it needed to dry for a good few hours. Now it was time to work on the body of this piece. And what I started with is using a green painter's tape and taping off the top portion. Once I had both sides masked off with painter's tape, I took some Up in Smoke water-based stain and I started staining the top portion, including the front drawer, with this gray stain. Once the top, the drawer, and the 2 sides were stained in the Up in Smoke, I removed the green painter's tape. I let the gray stain dry and then I did the reverse. I put the gray painter's tape along the stained line because I'm going to paint the deep sea blue underneath. So I just followed the stain line and put the masking tape right over it. I had a great question from Susie B on the SI blog when I posted this piece on Thursday. She asked, she says, I just have one question for this lovely redo. Why did you paint the strip on the sides of the top blue instead of staining the entire top gray? I had a great question from Susie B on the SI blog when I posted this piece on Thursday. She asked, she says, I just have one question for this lovely redo. Why did you paint the strip on the sides of the top blue instead of staining the entire top gray? And that's a great question because I've never seen it done before. That's the number one answer. I have never seen the corners painted before, and I thought it would look different and quite striking. And also because, I don't know if you'll notice in the video, but when I was looking at the piece, the corners looked slightly darker gray than the rest of the stain. So I guess that's what drew my eye to it in the first place, and it popped into my head to do something different. But again, you can always camouflage things that catch your eye, or just do something that you've never seen done before, because it's all just about playing around and being creative and trying new things. Sometimes they're a hit, sometimes they're not. In this case, I think it turned out quite beautiful. I love the way it looks. It gives it that little pop of something up top. But don't be afraid to try new things or do different things. As you can see, this laminate dresser had a little bit of bubbling and a little repair here and there that needed patching up. There was a scratch on the back, there was bubbling on the front, but BIN shellac or bin shellac base primer is a bonding primer, and you do not need to sand. This primer sticks to everything. And again, it didn't require a sanding. So I went ahead and I primed the top, knowing that I was going to sand afterwards to see exactly where I needed to put the wood fill. And I actually really like doing this. I realized the norm is to sand your piece, wood fill, and then prime. But often if I have these little divots that need repairing, it's hard to see until I prime. So I will go at it the opposite way, and it works perfect. I will prime. Once the primer is on, I see all the little flaws in the furniture, like the tiniest little divots you'll see once it's primed. So once I see all those, I get out the wood fill and I will fill all of them, and then I will sand, and then I will reprime again. I also have a full tutorial on how to use this BIN bonding shellac base primer, which I'll include in the card above and also in the description below. I took off the caster wheels. I was actually going to leave them on. One was missing. I was going to use a spare that I had from another project, but then I thought, nope, I want a more modern look for this piece, so I'm taking the 3 caster wheels totally off. To do this, I took a larger pry bar and a hammer, and they usually just you can whack them right off pretty easily unless they are really rusted. If they're really rusted in there, it might take, a little extra effort with that pry bar and a few more whacks with your hammer, but they will come out. The one caster wheel was so rusted on there, the little faceplate did not want to be pried off at all. So I ended up taking a wire, and I also tried using my screwdriver to really get in there and pry that away from the bottom of the leg. It did take some maneuvering. In fact, I ended up chipping my screwdriver, so it's not usable. But it did end up being pried away finally. And once I had it pried away enough to get that pry bar in behind, it whacked off pretty easily as well. Now I had all 4 caster wheels off and it was ready for the dog repair. This dresser is fairly old, and you can tell by the old school hardware. I took a pair of needle nose pliers and twisted off the old square nuts. This hardware is old and has been in there for a while, so I just use the back of my screwdriver and give the screws a big bang just to push them out. To remove the front plate of these knobs or handles, I used my anvil pry bar. These are super handy, these pry bars, these smaller pry bars for furniture repairs. And I just pried that finishing nail out, making sure not to damage the front of the drawer while doing so. Once I had the hardware off, I started collecting it in a plastic container just to make sure that all the hardware is all together. I wasn't sure if I was going to reuse it on this piece or not. I didn't end up using it on this piece, but I always keep all my hardware because you never know when they're going to come in handy for future makeovers. I continued with each drawer, taking them out, inspecting them, removing the hardware, and putting it aside in the container. You do not need any fancy sander or equipment. When I first started as a furniture painter, I didn't have an orbital sander. I didn't have a palm sander. I didn't have an oscillating tool. I had none of that. And I didn't even go out and buy a hand sanding tool. All I did was took a block of wood, wrapped a sandpaper around it, and this is what I would use for sanding the tops of my pieces and scuff sanding. And it was all just about swapping out the grit of the sandpaper. For a heavier grit, it's the lower number. So if you want an aggressive grit, it's say a 60 grit or an 80 grit. If you want a lighter grit or a less aggressive sandpaper, it's the higher the number. So you would do, say, a 180, a 220. That's just to smooth everything out. For instance, if you want to stain. But again, this quick tip, you don't need a lot of equipment to get yourself started. Here I'm using it to get into the tight corners of the drawers to sand and scuff the drawer fronts. But this oscillating tool comes with a variety of blades. So it comes with obviously the sanding attachment, and it works perfect to get into tight spaces, tight corners, etc. The tools come with blades that you can cut metal, you can cut plastic, you can sand. Again, I have a Mastercraft brand from Canadian Tire, but I kind of wish I had the Bosch one. That's on my wish list, which I will link that in the description down below if you want to see which one I'm talking about. But again, these are great tools to have on hand if you're a furniture painter. Because I had sanded the entire top and sanded right through the veneer, on one of these nightstands. I had the wood grain, like the grooves in the wood grain on the veneer on the top. So I had one nightstand with a very smooth finish and the other one that had the wood grain texture into it. So to fix this and create a perfectly smooth top so they both matched, I used Dixie Belle mud to skim the entire top of the bedstand. And all I did was take a putty knife and apply a thin layer of mud, or any sort of wood fill will work for this. You apply a thin layer onto the entire top. To speed up the dry time, I used my heat gun. Then I sanded it down perfectly smooth, and then I re-primed the top with BIN shellac base primer, and that is to block any of the bleed through that will come through. So if you ever have a piece of furniture that has that wood grain and you want it smoothed out, you take these exact 4 steps and that'll smooth everything out for you. And you just have to be sure to prime after you fill in the grooves with the mud or the wood fill. I used this on my dining room table over 2 years ago, and it still looks amazing and is holding up beautifully. It's super, super durable. It's easy to clean, and it's not only water resistant like most top coats, but it's actually water repellent. So when I spill something on my kitchen table, no worries. It's so easy peasy to clean up. So I sprayed 3 coats of gator hide on it. And here's another quick tip for when you're spraying. I added a very small amount of the leftover wash into my top coat. I would say it was definitely no more than 10%. You don't want to water down your top coat too much. So let's say 10% of the wash to about 90% of the gator hide. I mixed that really well. And then I sprayed 3 coats, sanding very lightly between the first and the second coat. No need to sand the last coat when you're applying a top coat. Also, if you ever top coated a wash and notice it started to turn slightly orange again, this trick will keep it looking very, very white, very clean. Boss is a stain blocking primer, so it will block odors, it will block stain, it will even block bleed through, but time is required to use this primer. So if any of you have been onto Salvaged Inspirations, my blog, or have watched any of my YouTube videos, you know that BIN shellac base primer is my go-to. And I will include the card up in the corner so you can go check out that video. The reason being is because it is fast. The BIN shellac base primer works quickly. The downside is it does have a very strong odor. The cleanup is not easy because it's not water-based, but go check out my video for the solution to that. And also, it's expensive. So Boss is a great alternative if you want a lesser expensive primer that's going to be a stain blocker, odor blocker, and also if you have the time to use it. So let me explain. It can be brushed on, sprayed on, or you can use a roller to apply it. It requires at least 2 coats. You apply the first coat, you wait 1 hour and apply a second coat. To get the stain blocking properties, you have to wait 24 hours before you paint. For myself and the amount of furniture I do on a weekly basis, the BIN or BIN shellac base primer makes more sense because within an hour I'm painting. But if you have the time, this Boss is a great alternative. The first thing I did was disassemble it, and it didn't have the standard screws, but rather these hex bolts. So I used a folding hex key set. Mine's a Husky. Works really well, and I just used this set to remove them. I find this tool super handy to have, as I've run into a good few pieces. They're usually newer pieces that are assembled this way. These tables were really easy to take apart, and here's what they look like in two pieces. I used this tool, which is a must-have in my toolkit, this oscillating tool, which I got a Mastercraft from Canadian Tire, but they have a ton of other really good brands that I'll list in the description box below. And this is a must-have because it has so many uses to it. Here, I put on the triangle sander, and it gets into corners and small places beautifully. I use this to sand off the front of these drawers. I also use them in every one of my makeovers when I'm, say, painting the drawer frame, and you know how you get a little bit of paint on the frame lip? I just clean it up, and it gives a really nice crisp line. These oscillating tools can also be used to cut, as I shared in my last doll planter video. They can grind, they can cut, they're great for plastic, metal, wood, they sand. There's so many uses to them. So again, I'll list a really good one down in the description box below if any of you are interested. This is by far way easier to use than one of those corner cat sanders. I had an email last week asking why I used an oval, and the answer is that they spread the paint really nicely. Here you'll see the oval brush, and the bristles just spread out and apply the paint beautifully. So it's not like the oval stays in its oval shape. While you're applying the paint and you add a little bit of pressure to it, these bristles fan out and give it a very smooth, lovely finish. They're beautiful brushes to work with. Here, as you see, there's two holes drilled into these nightstand drawers because, well, I guess the original hole wasn't filled and a different hardware was just used to cover it up. So I wanted something strong enough that if I decided to put another handle on, which I did not end up doing, you'll see that it ends up being a knob, but I didn't know that at this time. So I want to make sure that my filler is strong enough that it will be drillable. And Bondo is just that. You can drill through it, and it's not soft. It is tough as nails, and it will hold a screw in there just fine if need be. So whenever you have larger holes to fill, Bondo is a fantastic tool for that. It dries super hard, super tough, and it is drillable. So I decided to keep the base looking very, very natural. I sanded down the existing finish on the feet and the base, and then I used a Dixie Belle's water-based Au Naturel stain. This stain is super easy to use. You can water it down with water because, as I mentioned, it is water-based. You just shake it. I put it in a little plate, and I applied it with a very inexpensive chip brush. Working in sections, after I applied it with the chip brush, I just took a blue shop cloth and I wiped everything back to give it the natural wood look. When I first started painting my furniture and the business about 10 years ago, actually a little more now, if one of my pieces didn't sell, I'll admit I took it personally because let's face it, if you're an artist of any kind, you put your heart and soul, time and money, sweat and tears into creating one-of-a-kind piece, and we do our best to make something beautiful, and we hope others will see and appreciate the beauty in it as well. When this doesn't happen, it's disappointing. But after 10 plus years of selling furniture online, I've learned it's not personal. There are several factors that come into play on whether a piece sells or not. It could be price point, what's happening in the world, the pandemic, for example, the weather or seasons come into play, supply and demand, location preferences, and this is just to name a few. These are a few factors that can factor in how fast a piece of furniture will sell or in it not selling at all. So if one of my pieces don't sell, I just figure it's time to try something a little different and repaint it. And I actually enjoy doing it. There's no shame in redoing a piece of furniture. I believe the real shame would be to give up on the piece. And I have to admit, it's fun seeing how many different versions a piece of furniture can have. If you follow me over on salvagedinspirations.com for the last few years, you may know it's a Christmas tradition to restyle and make over this washstand. It's had 4 totally different looking makeovers to date, and it's shocking how it transforms with another color and style. I mean, it doesn't even look like the same piece. So here are a few tips if your pieces don't sell. And here's a few ideas maybe to get it out the door. 1, wait for another season and relist it. 2, change the wording in your ad. 3, check your competition and do some research in your area. 4, offer a delivery option for a fee. 5, retake your images and change your staging styling. 6, reprice your piece. It needs to be priced a little higher or lower, so check your area. And 7, repaint and create an entire new look, which of course is exactly what we're doing with this one here. They are created when you stripe the same color paint, but make the stripes a slightly different hue or sheen. You might see gorgeous examples on classic cars. They used to do that a lot and still do actually when they're redoing them. This can be achieved by using a different top coat, say a satin on the base and a high gloss on the stripe, for example. It can also be done by lightening or darkening your base color by a shade. Or an even easier way of doing this is to use glaze with a pearl or metallic mixed into your base color. Ghost stripes are most visible when the light hits them just right. So adding a metallic or a sheen or a pearl makes it just pop when that light hits it perfectly. You may notice that I have not filled the hardware holes and or the gouge at the bottom of this drawer. And the reason why I like doing this this way better than filling and then priming is because once I prime, I get to see every little detail that does need filling. Whereas if I was to fill first, sometimes I miss a lot and then I still have to fill and then reprime. I always encourage you to find what works for you. So this may not be the way you prefer to do it. In my case, it often saves me a step. And I fixed the missing edge banding and filled in all the scratches and flaws using a Dixie Belle wood filler. It's called Dixie Belle Mud. And the reason why I really like using this wood filler, it's a great choice if you're sanding by hand because it sands with seriously little to no effort. I started using my orbital sander to sand back and scuff the two tabletops, but here I'm also demoing how to sand this filler just using a regular sandpaper. So I hope you enjoyed today's quick tip compilation, and if you found any value in it, please give this video a like. Feel free to subscribe here on YouTube, and I'd love to hear which quick tip is your favorite in the comments down below. You can also find me over at salvagedinspirations.com, where I have over 600 furniture painting and DIY tutorials. Until next time, have a fabulous week. Bye guys.